This is the first of series we plan to have with the aim of putting out the forum's perspective on recent geopolitical developments. The format is conversation between Greg and I. I would like to start with G20. It took place recently. President Xi and President Putin were absent. A trade deal was signed on G20 sidelines by the US, EU, India, Saudi, and UAE on infrastructure corridor linking India and the Middle East to Europe. It's hailed as a modern version of the ancient spice road. And as a way, I think it was to counter China's modern Belt and Road, which often is referred to as modern Silk Road. So what does this deal signal, Greg?
Well, it was interesting first who wasn't there. As you said, neither Putin nor Xi were there. So that was interesting absences. But I think this new Spice Road, whatever we call it, is an interesting development. It reminds you a little bit of the Cold War in the sense that in those days, the countries in the global South had a chance to play off the United States and the Soviet Union. In a similar way, now it seems to me they have some opportunity to play off the United States and China with their competing initiatives. So I think on the whole, these things take a long time to develop, so we wouldn't expect anything dramatic to happen soon. But on the whole, I think recent events have begun to empower the global South somewhat. Long overdue, long process, gradual process. But even if you look at the expansion of the BRICS, which is no doubt going to be messy because they have quite different views on things. But again, it seems to me it's another evidence of some awakening in the global South. As I said, don't expect miracles overnight or even soon, but I think it seems to be significant. You might want to say, since you've been focused a lot on the digital elements of the Chinese activities around the world, you might want to say a little bit about how you think that fits into these recent developments.
Well, I was happy, to be honest, to see this new development. I think China's Belt and Road Initiative created a digital corridor and put its technology out there. And then because of technology and also because of the huge loans they gave, they brought these countries along the way. They bound them together and basically to China. So it's good to see an alternative forming next to it, but how it will develop, I know that China's project is a bit now in trouble, and it will be good to see how this new initiative will take place. There is another area that I like to discuss with you, and that's Russia. I mean, we all know about the bizarre events that took place recently in Russia, ranging from an aborted mutiny against Russia's armed forces in June, exposing weaknesses in the system, I assume, and also in Putin's authority. At the time, a deal was reached, but I remember William Barnes, the CIA director, pointed out that for Putin, revenge is a dish best served cold. And he was right. 2 months later, Prigozhin and his trusted commander, Dmitry Utkin, were dead, and the senior Russian general, Sergei Sorovikin, I think that's how it's pronounced, is sacked as Air Force chief. So has Putin regained his authority, and how does it impact the Ukraine war?
I think I'd hoped when the Prigozhin Opera Bouffe happened that maybe this was a sign of somewhat a deeper split inside the Russian military. If Russia cracks, it seems to me it's going to crack in the military. It's got to, in some sense, hate this war that's gobbling up recruits and supplies that can't really be replaced. Unhappily, for Prigozhin, and for the world, the Prigozhin episode didn't show cracks in the Russian military. And so I think that Putin really is back in control. Now, what happens depends a lot on the course of the war. The Russian people at some point are going to understand what's happening, I think, and get tired of this endless war. But for the moment, it seems to me he's back in control. He has, as we know, absolutely no interest to negotiate seriously about the war at least until the US presidential elections in 2024, because he might have Donald Trump back in the White House. That would be the end of aid to Ukraine. So I think he's, for the moment, back in control and unlikely to do anything except continue the fighting for the next year or more. In the end, it's hard for me to imagine that this doesn't turn out badly for Russia. It's costing them a lot of money. Putin has not reformed the economy in the 20 plus years he's been in power. It is in some sense a failing state. And it seems to me this outcome, however the outcome happens, it seems to me it's not likely to be good for Russia. What that means geopolitically is a very big question as well.
And you mentioned what it means geopolitically. Some cracks I see, the fact that intelligence is often bought from officials, which I think is very unusual and shows the degree of corruption in Russia. CIA advertised on Telegram where Russia could contact US to offer information. 2.5 million views within 1 week. So that tells us something about Russia. But I often worry about the instability that this could cause in the region, and also the possibility of using nuclear. How do you see those areas? How concerned are you?
I think it's a concern. In some ways, the Prigozhin episode was a sort of either or. On the one hand, people, your first instinct was great. Maybe this will end the war and make some change in Russia. Second instinct was, oh my God, maybe this is too much instability in a very important region. So I think both of those are concerns. I worry less about the nuclear threat, simply because all it would do would be to make Putin and Russia still more of a pariah in the international system. There's no decent military purpose for it. Probably never is a military purpose for a nuclear weapon. But so I think / hope that Putin is still sane enough to realize that would be a mistake all around, including for his objectives.
Iran is arming Russia. That is understandable, considering it's a two-way street. Iran, Russia's history is a bit cautionary, but and Iran also has a turmoil inside, but nevertheless, it gives and takes with Russia. So I understand that relationship. Russia provides technology and aircraft, Iran provides drones. So that's understandable. But recently we saw also North Korea leader Kim Jong-un went to Russia. And then, of course, Russia has some relation with China. So how do you see these alignments? We talked earlier about alignments, but how do you see these ones?
Well, in some sense, the meeting of Kim Jong-un and Putin is sort of the summit of the outcasts, right? That I suppose it's the old saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and neither of them have too many friends, though Russia's done surprisingly well at sustaining support, notwithstanding the war, at sustaining support in the global south, particularly. So significant, I think, maybe more significant for China and for North Korea. What this signals about North Korea's relations with China, which has always been sort of the troublesome little brother, right? That China, I think, cannot enjoy its dealings with Kim Jong-un and North Korea. But this does add another dimension to the geopolitics of the world and of the war. If, as it turns out, Kim Jong-un, somewhat surprisingly, has large stocks of artillery shells and other things that the Russians might be able to use. So, and for its part, North Korea and Kim Jong-un need whatever they can get, food, fuel, things that the Russians can provide. So it is, in that sense, a marriage of convenience.
Mm-hmm. And I think with Iran, it's the same thing.
Exactly.
But you brought us to China, and now I like to bring Taiwan into it. So no one underestimates President Xi's commitment to eventually control Taiwan. There is intelligence that President Xi has instructed his military to engage Taiwan by 2027. So on Ukraine war, Biden put together the coalition with impressive speed. where is the red line in the US Taiwan Relations Act of 1979? Do we have a red line there? And if we have, where is it?
I'm not sure there is a red line, or could be. We've for a long time pursued a policy called strategic ambiguity, right? Trying to hope that enough uncertainty in the minds of the Chinese leaders would make them not want to take the risk of doing something adventurous toward Taiwan. President Biden has gone further and saying, yes, we will defend Taiwan. So, but it's still not clear to me that there is or necessarily should be a red line. The Chinese have seen and will no doubt do their own war games, but we've seen from all of the war games that for them to take Taiwan by force wouldn't be easy and might wind up destroying the prize they seek in any case, all those chip manufacturing facilities that both the United States, the West, and China care about. So I think in that sense, while I worry that Xi is impatient, realizes he has to make China rich before it gets old, still I think that the difficulty of doing something dramatic quickly about Taiwan would deter even Xi. Let us hope.
One concern I have is intelligence. Do we have really good sources of intelligence in China? I remember a decade ago that network was discovered. Large number of people were arrested, some executed. And recently we had China hacking US military and government emails. So do we have really good intelligence? It seems they have now after hacking. Are they going to have good intelligence? Or is US have good intelligence on them?
Well, you're certainly right that as far as we can tell from all the press accounts that the US network was rolled up about a decade ago. Apparently, as far as we can tell, it was really just a labor-intensive effort. The Chinese just threw lots and lots of people at it and began to look for connections and found them. So I think that from that point of view, our human sources in China presumably are fairly thin and few. I think our intelligence effort toward China is certainly significant. Whether we have certainly we don't have all the sources we would like, but and China has been pretty opaque. Even the academics haven't been able to travel much in and out of China in recent years. So it's been somewhat opaque, I think. Intelligence probably does a bit better, but still not where we'd like by way of understanding what's going on inside the country.
What's the troubles that we see around the world today, especially the ones we discussed today, Russia or China, the key ones? It seems everything is about a sphere of influence. So Russia and Ukraine, China and Taiwan, even I can extend it, for example, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria, as Iran regards those as its sphere of influence. This concept that seems to be at the heart of most problems, does it really relevant to this day and time?
It seems like it shouldn't be relevant to this day and time. There's enough globalization these days, so you'd think it wouldn't be relevant. And for better or worse, the United States, who used to think of Latin America as its sphere of influence, hasn't paid a lot of attention, only paid attention to the problem of migration. So it seems to be slightly paradoxical to see these sphere of influence language and actions revive a bit. Now, Putin has certainly made a very big deal of it, gone further than sphere of influence, saying that basically Ukraine is part of Russia, right? It's not part of my sphere of influence, it's part of Russia. So he's taken it one step further. But I do find it, at this point in history, even given that globalization has slowed some, it does seem rather weird to talk about spheres of influence these days. The Chinese certainly do. They feel like they would like to keep the United States out of their first line of islands. And that's a big part of the reason for all the buildup in the South China Sea. So they too are thinking in rather sphere of influence terms, which seems to me pretty old-fashioned in this world.
Well, one would say it's easy for the United States to say that because they don't have anything to be worried about in their doorstep. How would you respond to that?
Yes, that is has been the great advantage of geographic position, having friends on both neighbors, though sometimes former President Trump talks as though Mexico is not really a friend when he talks about invading it. But basically, we've had the good fortune to have friendly nations on both our borders and a generally, troubled continent, but not one that posed any geopolitical threat to the United States. So that's been a relatively happy circumstance, and it continues also happily. And maybe that is the reason why we are someone like me is somewhat surprised by other people talking explicitly about spheres of influence.
You mentioned about that if Trump was in office, situation was different in terms of Ukraine. How worried are you about the upcoming elections?
Very, very. It does seem to me it's at this point you'd have to say it's too close to call. It's clear that Trump, one way or another, is going to be the Republican nominee. He really has no competition. At this point, it's too late for anyone other than Biden to run on the Democratic side. And all the polls, not very valuable this far away from the election, but do indicate it would be close. And to do this alternating back and forth from engaged and active to make America great again and retiring, withdrawing from the world, that already I think you hear from our friends and allies, they're happy that we're back in the world and back trying to lead, but worry about what happens next because they've seen it happen once. They know it can happen again. So
yeah, they lost the trust.
Yes, they absolutely, and they have, and understandably, it's what they've seen. They've bound to lose trust because they know it can happen again.
Well, I think I would say the fact that things are not as bad as it could have been in the United States. Part of it, we can thank Jack Dorsey of Twitter, now X, and Facebook also followed when they deactivated then President Trump's Twitter account and the later Facebook account, and in effect silenced him. Recently also we have seen Elon Musk influencing the war in Ukraine. We know that at the beginning he influenced it positively by providing a Starlink to Ukraine, which proved to be really critical to their advancements in terms of technology. And recently we heard that it refused Ukraine's government's request to activate a Starlink all the way to Sevastopol, which is the largest city in Crimea. So the reason, according to Elon Musk, was to avoid escalating the conflict. I find it troubling that private sector has such a power, both nationally and internationally in politics, and could influence the politics to this extent, considering private sector is not elected, often uninformed enough about political issues. So in one hand, they envision the frontiers of innovation and they own the technology, but how should we deal with that? This is a newcomer that we want to welcome to the world of politics, rightfully, but how should we ensure that their interference is just and right?
You're certainly right. You've done a lot of work on thinking about this, but you're certainly right that we're sort of feeling our way forward, that we've come to realize that these big tech companies are geopolitical actors in their own right. That's been one of the underlying premises of our work together with the Global TechnoPolitics Forum. But then how to deal with them, that doesn't settle how to deal with them. It says you have to deal with them. And one of the great gaps that seem to be in international institutions is that they don't really include the private sector in any meaningful way, when, as you say, the private sector is more and more important. So the challenge, it seems to me, is finding ways to deal cooperatively, not punitively, with the private sector, but to do something. I mean, for Elon Musk to be out there in effect making his own foreign policy is really not acceptable in this world. And somehow we need to find ways to curb that possibility while letting the tech companies innovate and do the things they're best at. We're in this whole area, you're the expert on data governance, but we're still in the United States pretty far behind, it seems to me, even the Europeans, in thinking about how we govern data, much less how we govern the big tech companies. That's before us, but the episode in Ukraine makes you realize that it's pretty urgent. It's not one of these things we can sit on, and we need to do it soon.
I don't think that it's right to have this much of power in the hand of one private citizen.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, certainly Musk is wonderfully creative, but he's also pretty zany in many respects. And like so many self-made rich people, he thinks he can do everything and thinks he knows about everything. So somehow we need to find, now we basically left the big platforms to regulate themselves. And that isn't good enough. We need to find a better way to do it without no interest in stifling their creativity, but we need to find ways to regulate them. People have talked about turning them into public utilities. That's probably not going to happen, and maybe not a wise thing in any case, but finding some middle ground that does have lots of latitude for them to innovate, but doesn't have Elon Musk making his own foreign policy, or even Jack Dorsey, as you suggested earlier, deciding who gets to be on Twitter and who not. That's an urgent, I think.
In an article we wrote sometime, I think last year or 2 years ago together, we compared the data today to oil. I wanted to see if there are any lessons to bring from the history. The oil companies certainly had a lot of power. So in their dealings, to what extent they were independent and making their own foreign policy, to what extent they were collaborating. Was this collaboration compulsory, or was that just goodwill of individuals in these companies? Is there any lessons we can learn from those?
I think maybe some lessons that now, data is the black gold of the current period. Probably the differences between oil and data are significant. I mean, after all, oil is somewhere and going to somewhere. Data is everywhere and in principle moving across borders easily. But the extent to which the big oil companies, in some sense, became pretty important actors in foreign policy, I think is something we can learn both good and bad lessons from. In those days, they were more, it seems to me, disposed to work with the nation state, particularly the United States.
And British as well.
And the British as well. So there may be some lessons to learn from that. We seem like we're in an era beyond national champions. On the other hand, it seems to me the tech companies want to have it both ways. When they want to work in China, they say, oh, we're borderless. And when they want to avoid being regulated, they say, oh, no, if you regulate us, you'll give an advantage to China. Right? And so they're so far have succeeded in basically having it both ways. And I think that's part of the problem we need to work on.
Well, I think there's a lot of issues to discuss, but I think for the time being, I am satisfied with the issues, unless there is a topic that you want to bring in.
No, is there something on your mind that we have missed, Patty?
Not really. I mean, there are some issues that I like to discuss about Middle East. Iran specifically, yesterday was the rallies all over the world in support of 1 year passing from the Mahsa Amini's death, which was the beginning of uprising. But I think that needs an episode on its own, looking at the region.
Yeah, it'd be great to have something on the greater Middle East with a focus on Iran. That would be terrific.
Well, in that case, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.